Today's reading from the prophet Habbikuk was written around the 7th century BCE, but it could just as easily have been written last week. The common thread that I see between the 7th century BCE and last week is that of vulnerability. It isn't surprising to me that I'm seeing vulnerability at every turn. I'm currently participating in an internship for clinical pastoral education in the hope of becoming a chaplain. I'm working at the University of Tennessee Medical Center. Part of my responsibility is answering pages. Frequently, I am paged to the trauma bay. As many of you know, UT is a level 1 trauma hospital. So we get the worst of the worst, and we get a lot of them. My first experience in the trauma bay was frightening and awe-inspiring. It is controlled chaos. People are yelling back and forth. People are hearing only what they need to hear. It's just an amazing, amazing experience. When the patients first arrive, the very first thing that happens is that their clothes are cut off, and they are left exposed as God created them in front of a group of strangers in a very well-lit, large, open space with lots of people walking around. Very, very vulnerable situation for those folks to be in. The second thing that happens is that determinations are made as to the degree of their injuries. As part of that process, each person is given a very quick, but I'm sure very embarrassing, rectal exam. The first time I saw that, I was just totally shocked. I wasn't expecting to see that. It was like watching a train wreck. I no longer watch because I know what's going to be happening. I just pray for that person. But I've learned to listen to the key words, which are no blood and good tone. And good tone means that there is very likely no neurological damage. So it's actually a very good thing. It's just a marvel to me that someone discovered that connection. Also in the trauma bay, I've seen patients, one in particular comes to mind, with a look of total despair on his face, complete vulnerability. He had been revived from an attempted suicide. I've seen people who have stuck knives in their necks. I've seen the staff humbled by the arrival of children from the Life Star. It's a very different atmosphere when children are involved. You can tell that the docs and the staff are thinking about their own children or other children in their lives. No one wants to see a child who has been hurt in an accident. The next level up from the trauma bay is the ER. And from the ER, we go to the trauma ICU. I've had the privilege of sharing time with many families in the ICU. One dad in particular stands out. He was watching as his 16-year-old daughter had to be reintubated after a seizure. They had been down vacationing from northern New York. Dad had been driving the motorcycle, and there was an accident. It was not his fault. And he stood there watching his 16-year-old, healthy, vibrant daughter, unable to speak, responsive by nodding her head, but that was about it. Her prognosis is quite good, very, very promising. But the point is, right now, she's laying in ICU in a strange city with a tube in her throat. So Dad and I had a good conversation and a good opportunity to pray. That was vulnerability, both dad and daughter. I sat with a man who honored his father's wishes of not extending his life and having the life support system turned off. The man then sat with his dad for 4 days, holding his hand, waiting for him to die. And even though he knew that he was doing the right thing for his father, he questioned his role in the death of his dad. He was very, very vulnerable. I've had my own personal opportunities to embrace my vulnerability since I've been working over there at the hospital. You run into yourself a lot when you're encountering people who are in pain, who are suffering, who are scared. One thing that I have struggled with, it's been a lifelong struggle for me, has been the inability to express anger at God. This is to my detriment. I know it would be better for me if I could increase my level of trust that it would be okay to yell at God. And I was finally able to do that last week. It was a series of events that created the perfect storm in my life, and I finally just railed at God. I cursed at God. I was crying. I ultimately felt better. The earth continued to rotate. God handled it just fine. Socially, of course, we see vulnerabilities every day in our world, in our nation. Issues of systemic racism are rampant in our country, and yet they are denied. Or racism is encouraged through hateful rhetoric. Our political system is in trouble. It's really struggling. We know that. We have people seeking asylum who are not being treated very well. We know that. We see children being sent to the border by themselves. I cannot imagine how vulnerable a parent, a mother, a father must feel in order to send their child off alone, trusting that a friendly country will care for them. We have a broken medical system. We have a broken food system. We are a society that focuses on wants over needs, who does not understand the concept of enough. Scarcity rules the day for most of us in the U.S. We fear that there will not be enough for us, so we take more than we need. And slowly, we are killing our planet. Internationally, of course, there's a great deal of pain and suffering and vulnerability, much of which we have no control over. There are atrocities that go on that are morally abhorrent to us, but we can do nothing. Female genital mutilation, people in the Middle East who receive a death sentence because they were born gay or lesbian. Genocide, the deforestation of the rainforest, countries who put profit over the environment. There is so much to worry about. Even though it's happening far, far away, it's affecting us locally. And I think we all feel a sense of vulnerability these days, whether we call it that or not. That's what we're feeling. And here at COS, we feel that very keenly. Of course, locally, nationally, we can vote. We do have some power, some control over our government. But yet there's a lot that we don't have control over. And we question what to do. What can we do? What power do we have? And we sincerely ask ourselves these questions on a fairly regular basis. Even our own existence right now is a little murky. The days of having communion in the round are no more. There are far, far too many of us, and it's a wonderful problem to have. It's exciting. We have new voices, new faces, new talents, new gifts, new thoughts, fresh ideas. This is all wonderful. But if we're really honest with ourselves, it's a little scary too. It's change, and change is vulnerable. But we'll be okay. We'll figure it out. We always do. And there's no reason to believe that the same won't happen now. So how do we deal with this vulnerability? I've been thinking about this a lot, and I always come back to this wonderful story. This is a true story. I experienced this event. It was a birthday party for one of my nieces, and the presents had been opened, and the cake and ice cream had been consumed, and sugar was running amok among the children. So there were 4 of them, and they decided that they wanted to run upstairs to play in one of the bedrooms. One of the attendees to the party was Lilo, who is my brother's mother-in-law. And Lilo never attended an event without her faithful companion, Blackie, the little dog. So Lilo and Blackie were sitting on a step on the stairway, and the kids ran up. It was the eldest, Rose, followed by Johnny, who was, Rose was 6, Johnny was 4, and then the twin girls, they were not twin girls, they were cousins born 2 weeks apart, Katie and Mary. And they ran up and just came to an abrupt halt because Blackie was blocking their way. Giggles ensued. Rose, being the eldest and the one with the longest legs, simply stepped over Blackie, turned around and stared at Johnny, just daring him to figure out a way to get over Blackie. Well, Johnny didn't have the legs to do that. But he was a boy, all boy. So he went over to the stair rail and through a somewhat dangerous, convoluted, creative way, climbed over the rail, through the rail. At one point he was holding on by one leg and one arm and flailing his arm. And eventually he got to the step above Blackie. So the 2 elders were there looking down at the younger girls, the 3-year-olds. Katie, who was actually Lilo's granddaughter, walked over to her Omi, her grandma, sat on her lap and asked for help to get over to the next step. And Grandma obliged and lifted Katie over the dog. And then finally we come to Mary, red-headed Mary, who was sucking on a lollipop. And she was eyeball to eyeball with Blackie. And she stood there for a moment, considering the situation. Just the lollipop in and out of her mouth, in and out of her mouth. And then finally, she removed the lollipop, looked him in the eye, and shouted, "Move!" And Blackie just took off, and Mary proceeded up the steps. And they went off to play. They were very, very happy. I have never forgotten this story. I think this is a good life lesson in how to get through life and life's struggles. But it's also a good lesson in how to deal with vulnerability on all 4 of the levels that we have spoken of: social, physical, emotional, spiritual. And they can be combined, they can be used at different times. We can either step over them if we are in a position of power. We may have to get creative and find ways around them. We may need to ask for help, or we may be asked for help. Or sometimes we just have to shout, "Move!" We are a community of faith, deep believers in God, and deep within our hearts, we desire to bring about God's kingdom. We can do this individually and communally, supporting one another, we can address vulnerability, our own, our communities, our nations, our worlds, using the life lesson learned from Blackie. Just remember, sometimes we can step over, sometimes we get creative, turn around, figure out other ways. Sometimes we ask for help or give help, and sometimes we just have to yell, "Move!"